I never expected the world I'd built with my husband to collapse in a single phone call. But that Monday afternoon, as I stood in the break room at work, my phone buzzed with his number. His voice crackled through the line cold, triumphant, carrying a sneer I could practically feel. "I'm divorcing you," he declared, a smile audible in his tone. "I already sold the house." "Good luck, sweetheart." My heart plummeted. We'd argued before, sure, but never like this. Shock, betrayal, rage all warred within me at once. In that moment, I had no idea how drastically my life was about to change. I was washing a coffee mug in the tiny kitchenette of the publishing firm where I worked when my phone rang. Usually, I would let unfamiliar or inconvenient calls go to voicemail, but my husband's name lit up the screen. Despite our recent tensions, I felt a flash of guilt for ignoring him. Little did I know how that simple decision, pressing the green icon to answer, would ignite the kind of chaos you'd only expect in a soap opera. "You might want to sit down," he began, not bothering with a greeting. His voice had a peculiar tone, smug and dismissive at once. I glanced at the clock, 2:17 p.m. Our divorce would later be time-stamped in my memory, beginning precisely then. "I'm divorcing you," he said, cutting straight to the chase as if delivering an unremarkable piece of news. "Actually, I've already filed. You'll get the papers soon. And by the way, I sold the house. I had to. Good luck dealing with that." My knees almost gave out. "The house," I repeated, voice strangled. We'd purchased our suburban home just 3 years prior, hoping to start a family once we were both settled in our careers. Selling it had never been discussed, not even in our worst fights. "You can't just sell it," I managed, though panic choked my words. "It's in both our names." He laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. "Your signature was on everything." "Don't worry, I took care of all the messy details. If you're looking for your cut, well, let's just say there's nothing left. The money's gone, used to pay off a few debts. Sorry." Then he hung up. That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just the click of a call ending, followed by the hum of the office refrigerator behind me, the chatter of co-workers drifting in from the hallway, and the thunderous roar of blood in my ears. It was as if I'd been dropped into someone else's nightmare. I stumbled to a nearby chair, letting the half-washed coffee mug clatter in the sink. My mind spun like a tornado, colliding with questions and confusion. How could he have sold the house without my knowledge? Why had he become so cruel? Yes, our marriage had been rocky for the past year, but I never saw this level of betrayal coming. And if he was divorcing me, how was he able to orchestrate the sale behind my back? I tried calling him back, but it rang straight to voicemail. I texted him, my thumbs jabbing the screen in desperation. "What do you mean, sold the house? Where am I supposed to live? Where are you living?" No response. My heart hammered against my ribs, each pulse a reminder that I was in free fall, with no net in sight. In the days leading up to that phone call, I'd sensed a distance between us. We slept in the same bed but rarely touched. We ate together in silence, scrolling on our phones instead of talking. I chalked it up to stress, to the way relationships sometimes drift, believing that we'd find our way back to each other. But now, with our marriage apparently over, I realized I'd been missing a deeper layer of deception. For the next few minutes, I sat there, numb, until my boss peeked into the break room, concerned. "You okay?" she asked gently. I looked up with eyes that felt hollow, my mind barely registering the question. I need to go," I stammered, unsure if it was a request or a statement. She nodded, letting me pass by her as I grabbed my purse and fled the building. My head swirled with panic and devastation, unaware that beneath that initial shock, a seed of defiance had planted itself, one that would grow into something stronger than either of us could have foreseen. I drove aimlessly for an hour, weaving through streets I barely recognized. My hands shook on the wheel, I could hardly breathe, let alone think about the scale of my husband's betrayal. Yet amidst the panic, adrenaline sharpened my senses. I realized my next move had to be more than an emotional reaction. I needed to understand how this happened. My first call was to my best friend, Tia, a relentless source of honesty and moral support. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey, I'm at work," she said. "Can I call you back?" "Tia," I breathed, my voice quivering. "He sold the house, my husband. He said he's divorcing me. I broke off, tears threatening to spill over. She went silent for half a beat. "What? Where are you?" "I'm coming right now." Within 30 minutes, we met at a quiet coffee shop. By then, I had managed to calm down enough to relay the facts. "He said he sold it. We're co-owners. I don't understand how he could do this without my signature, or at least my knowledge. There must be some forgery, or I don't know." My voice shook with equal parts anger and confusion. Tia's eyes narrowed. "Have you checked with the bank or the realtor, looked at any documents? Talked to a lawyer?" "No, not yet," I admitted, feeling foolish. "I just found out." She nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Okay, first things first. You need to confirm if the house is really sold. He might be lying to rattle you, though it seems like a weird bluff. Then we figure out the next steps." Her matter-of-fact tone steadied me. Tia worked in finance. She knew how to unravel complicated transactions. "I'll help you dig," she added. "We'll find out what he's been doing." I nodded, sipping the coffee she'd ordered for me. My throat felt raw from stress, the bitter taste hardly registering. My mind whirled with the memory of our wedding day, the vow to share a life, a home, dreams. When had love shifted into something monstrous? Had I missed glaring red flags? Soon, Tia and I parted ways. I headed back to what I still thought of as our home, half expecting the locks to be changed. But my key slid in, turning with a familiar click. Inside, nothing appeared different. The living room still held our couch, the pictures on the walls, the faint smell of the lavender candle I loved. Only the hush felt ominous, a silent testament to the betrayal that had upended my reality. I called a realtor friend of ours, Mark, leaving a shaky voicemail. "Hi, Mark, it's me. Could you call me back? It's urgent. I need to know if our house was sold. Please." While I waited for his response, I made another call to a lawyer I'd found through a quick online search. The receptionist promised a consultation within a week, but it felt like an eternity. My head pounded. My marriage was dissolving, my home was presumably sold, and I had no idea where my husband even was. The phone line, the texts, everything was silent on his end. Minutes after that call, the front door rattled. My chest seized, expecting him to walk in, but it was Tia holding a stack of printouts. "I found something," she said grimly, handing the papers to me. They were records from the county registry. Indeed, it showed a sale of the property, dated just days before. The listed sellers were my husband, and, alarmingly, my name as if I had signed off. My signature was scrawled next to his. A wave of sickening realization washed over me. He had forged my signature, defrauding me in the process. Tia tapped one line, pointing out the sale price, suspiciously low. "It's a quick sale," she said, her voice trembling with anger on my behalf. He wanted fast cash, obviously. Who knows where that money is now? My blood went cold. This was more than a betrayal. It was a calculated act of cruelty and theft. A quiet fury began to crystallize around my heartbreak. I was reeling, but I also felt a flicker of defiance, the sense that I wouldn't let him get away with this. Not without a fight. The next few days felt like an extended nightmare. I used personal leave from work, unwilling to face my colleagues while my world crumbled. Instead, I spent hours on the phone with lawyers and real estate agents, trying to claw back any semblance of control. In each conversation, the same questions arose. How did he manage to forge your signature? Why didn't you see it coming? And each time, I felt more foolish, more violated. Then Mark, our realtor friend, finally called back. You okay? He asked immediately. The concern in his voice soothed me, if only for a moment. Not really, I admitted. Did you handle the sale? Did you know anything? He sighed. He didn't come to me. I found out when I looked up the listing in the database. He used some other agent I've never heard of. I'm sorry, I had no clue, or I'd have warned you. My stomach lurched. We'd known Mark for years. The fact that my husband avoided him indicated a deliberate attempt to keep things hidden. Mark offered to help any way he could, confirming that yes, the sale was final. The new owners would be moving in soon. After we ended the call, I thought about the life my husband and I shared. The late-night talks, the plans we made, the initial spark of romance that had drawn me to him. Where had this cold, calculating stranger come from? My questions found some answers the following day, when Tia, unstoppable in her detective work, forwarded me an online profile. I found him, she wrote in the subject line of her email. The profile belonged to a high-end recruitment site for executives, listing my husband under a new job title at a new company in another state. The start date was immediately after the house was sold. He had planned everything to vanish, leaving me with nothing. Scrolling through the details, my eyes caught on a single line, marital status single. My heart constricted. He was living an entirely new life, presenting himself as unattached, presumably using the money from the house sale to fund this fresh start. There were even photos, him in a sleek suit, shaking hands with potential business associates. A wide grin plastered on his face. A lump formed in my throat, followed by a surge of rage. He had basically replaced our life with some self-serving fantasy, leaving me to pick up the pieces. Within hours, Tia and I found more. A new condo had been purchased in his name in that state, using funds suspiciously close to the amount the house sold for. The pieces fit together like a twisted puzzle. He'd siphoned off our marital asset, forged my signature, stashed the money, and planned to file for divorce once he was secure in his new location. For him, it was the perfect escape plan. For me, it was betrayal on a scale I never imagined possible. That evening, I slumped on my bed, a place that still smelled of him. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but behind that sorrow lay a quiet, simmering fury. I knew I had to act fast. Legal battles take time, but if I let him finalize everything without a fight, I'd be left with no recourse. I picked up my phone, dialed the lawyer's office, and left a message. I need to expedite this consultation. There's fraud involved. My voice trembled, but a fierce resolve steadied my words. I want justice. I'm not letting him slip away with everything. 2 days later, I sat in a plush office across from a sharp-eyed attorney named Miriam Shaw. Her desk was immaculate, and her demeanor radiated both confidence and empathy. After reviewing the documents Tia and I had gathered, she leaned forward, hands clasped on the mahogany surface. You have a strong case, she began, her tone unwavering. Forgery of a spouse's signature is a felony. He obviously aimed to defraud you. This is not just a divorce, it's criminal conduct. My throat tightened, hearing those words articulated so plainly. But how does that help me get back the house or the money? The new owners move in soon, right? She nodded, lips pursed. We can challenge the sale. If it was executed with a forged signature, it can be declared void. However, it's complicated. The buyer might sue him or potentially both of you for misrepresentation. You could end up in a court battle with the new owners as well. It's messy, but in principle, the sale shouldn't stand. Meanwhile, you also have claims for marital assets, spousal support, and punitive damages given his fraudulent actions. My heart pounded. I'd never pictured my life entangled in such legal webs. But if it was the only route to justice, so be it. What do I do first? Miriam flipped through her notes. File for immediate temporary injunction to freeze any assets in his name, particularly that new condo. Force him back into the jurisdiction so we can settle the property dispute. We'll also file criminal charges for forgery. With enough evidence, we can press him to settle quickly rather than face jail time. A wave of relief washed over me, but also trepidation. That's a lot. Her gaze softened. It is. But it's our best chance to ensure you're not left penniless while he lives off the proceeds of your shared home. She tapped her pen on the desk. I sense you're hesitant. That's normal, especially when dealing with someone you once loved. But trust me, men like him, people like him, bank on your fear. They assume you won't fight. That's how they get away with it. I swallowed. Her words struck a chord, kindling my simmering anger. He thinks I'll just roll over, I said quietly. He thinks I'll be too devastated to act. Miriam nodded, eyes locked on mine. Prove him wrong. I left her office with a stack of papers to sign. Outside, the sky was overcast, threatening rain. I lingered on the sidewalk, letting a few heavy drops land on my skin. Instead of despair, I felt a surge of determination. If he wanted a war, I was ready to fight. I wasn't the weak woman he imagined I'd be. When I got home, I called Tia. Let's do this, I told her. I'm hiring Miriam. I want to sue him for everything he's got. Tia laughed, a bright sound in the gloom. Now, that's what I like to hear. That night, I lay awake in the dark, mentally composing everything I wanted to say to him. The heartbreak was still there, an open wound, but outrage stoked it into something sharper. My mind formed visions of exposing him his lies, his theft, his betrayal to the new condo neighbors, to the people at his fancy new job, to all the friends he'd ever boasted to about our marriage. Perhaps it was petty, but the thought of him suffering even a fraction of the pain he'd inflicted on me offered a grim kind of solace. I closed my eyes, inhaling. My journey toward justice would be arduous, possibly brutal, but I refused to let him reduce me to a footnote in his new, carefree life. A week later, the legal wheels began to turn. Miriam filed the necessary documents to contest the home sale, freeze assets, and initiate divorce proceedings from my side, complete with accusations of fraud. The next step was to serve him those documents in his new city. We had an address for the condo, courtesy of Tia's internet sleuthing. But Miriam also strongly suggested we attempt to informally serve him in person, perhaps at his new workplace, to ensure there was no denial of receipt. Part of me wanted to avoid seeing him entirely. Another part craved that confrontation, to look him in the eyes and watch his smug confidence crumble. Tia, bold as ever, volunteered to come along. I'll be your moral support and backup, she said, wiggling her eyebrows as if expecting a brawl. I wasn't sure if that was comforting or nerve-wracking, but I accepted. Having her by my side meant I might not lose my composure. So on a grey Wednesday morning, we embarked on a 3-hour drive to his new city. My stomach twisted in knots the whole way. Tia handed me a bag of peppermints, insisting they helped with anxiety-induced nausea. By the time we arrived, I'd polished off half the bag. According to his company's website, his new office was in a glossy, high-rise downtown. It felt surreal stepping into the sleek lobby, my pumps clicking on the polished marble floor. A giant waterfall sculpture dominated one wall, the hush broken by the sound of rushing water. I swallowed, my heart pounding. He works here now? I thought bitterly. Meanwhile, I was on the verge of losing my own job due to stress and time off. We approached the reception desk. We're here to see Alan Robertson, Tia said, her tone all business. Personal matter. The receptionist eyed us, checking a list. Do you have an appointment? Please inform him it's urgent, Tia replied, and I marveled at her calm facade. She made a call murmuring quietly. Then she looked up with an apologetic smile. "He's in a meeting. I can see if he'll step out." My pulse hammered as we waited, every second an agony. But within minutes, we spotted him stepping off the elevator, scanning the lobby for whomever was seeking him. The moment our eyes met, his face drained of color. Shock, then irritation, flickered across his features as he marched over. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, glancing around to ensure no co-workers overheard. "This is my place of work. You can't just show up," Tia bristled. "We can, and we did. You've got some documents to sign, Alan." He glared at her, then zeroed in on me. "What the hell is this? A conspiracy?" "You have no right." I cut him off, voice trembling but firm. "We have every right. You forged my signature and stole our house out from under me. You can't run away from that." His eyes narrowed, though I caught a flicker of unease. He forced a sneer. "So you come here with your little friend to do what? Serve me papers?" He barked a laugh, though it sounded unsteady. "You can't prove a damn thing." Tia held out the envelope. "We have copies of the forged documents, bank transfers, plus affidavits from the real estate office. Proving it won't be a problem. Now, kindly accept service." He didn't take the envelope. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, noticing co-workers in earshot. With a curse, he yanked my arm, dragging me toward a side corridor. Tia followed, refusing to be left behind. In that corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He rounded on me, eyes blazing. "You're making a spectacle. I was going to send you money eventually, just needed it for my new place." My head spun at the audacity. "You married me. We shared a life, or so I thought. Then you vanish, forging my name, selling my property, and you talk about eventually sending me money, like tossing a bone to a stray dog?" My voice cracked with anger. He scowled. "Don't be dramatic. Our marriage was dead. You should have seen that. You want to fight me? Fine, we'll settle in court. But I promise you, you'll regret making this public. I have more resources than you can imagine." Tia cut in, stepping protectively between us. "We'll see what the courts say when they see the evidence. Sign this now, or we'll have it delivered by an officer in front of your entire department." Alan's face contorted. He swiped the envelope from her hand, his glare drilling into me. "This is how you want to play it. All right, let's see how tough you can be when the lawyers tear you apart." He spun on his heel, shoulders tense, and stalked back to the elevator bank, ignoring the stares from passers-by. My knees threatened to buckle. Tia looped an arm around my waist, steadying me. The confrontation was over, but my heart still hammered. Seeing him face to face stirred up old emotions, both the ache of betrayal and the rage that now fueled me. He was the one who should be afraid, I realized. We had the evidence. Miriam was confident. This was the last time he would dismiss me with a sneer. We walked out of that building into the damp city air, both of us exhaling shakily. Tia squeezed my hand. "He looked rattled," she said quietly. I nodded, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. He should be. The days leading up to our first court hearing churned by in a blur of depositions and legal motions. Miriam moved swiftly, petitioning the court to freeze his newly acquired condo and any related assets. My husband's attorneys responded with an onslaught of denials and counterclaims, asserting that I'd agreed to sell the house willingly. However, the signature analysis we commissioned provided near irrefutable evidence. The scrawled signature on the sale papers was not mine. Still, each day was a psychological marathon. I never knew what new tactic he might try. He could spin lies about my mental state, my finances, anything to deflect blame. Miriam warned me to expect a brutal approach. "He'll do anything to save himself," she said. "Be ready." The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the entire saga, how we met in college, how our love blossomed into marriage, and how we drifted over time. The memories twisted like knives. When dawn broke, I felt hollowed, yet determined. I dressed in a conservative suit, tied my hair back, and steeled myself. Tia drove me to the courthouse, giving me a reassuring pat on the knee. "You've got this." Inside, the formalities of the courtroom struck me as surreal. The clack of heels on marble floors, the murmur of attorneys conferring with clients, the stern bailiff instructing everyone to rise when the judge entered. When I spotted my husband across the aisle, my breath hitched. He looked unnervingly calm, wearing a well-tailored suit, his expression impassive. Judge Reynolds, a middle-aged woman with astute eyes, took the bench. The attorneys launched into their arguments. Miriam was succinct and compelling, laying out the facts. I never signed the documents. The sale occurred without my knowledge or consent, and the proceeds funded his relocation. My husband's lawyer tried to cast doubt, claiming I'd verbally authorized him to sell. But when they produced an email exchange allegedly confirming my consent, Miriam ripped it apart by highlighting timestamps that contradicted my whereabouts and established phone records. Then came my turn to testify. My nerves flared as I approached the stand, but Miriam's prior coaching steadied me. I recounted how I discovered the sale through my friend's research, how he'd called me flippantly to announce both the divorce and the house's sale, how the signature on the deed was clearly forged. My voice trembled at times, but each word dripped with the raw truth of betrayal. Near the end of my testimony, my husband's lawyer tried to rattle me. "Isn't it true you had substantial marital problems for months, and didn't you once threaten to leave him, even if it meant forfeiting your share of the property?" I bristled. "We had arguments like any couple, but I never threatened to give up my rights to the house. That's absurd." I caught a fleeting smirk on my husband's face, as if he relished the humiliating personal details being aired. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze head-on. "You won't break me," I willed silently. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The hearing concluded with Judge Reynolds ordering a temporary freeze on the condo he'd purchased and placing the funds from the house sale into escrow until the case was resolved. My husband left the courtroom swiftly, ignoring me. His attorney offered only a curt nod of acknowledgement as they swept past. But I noted their tense posture, the lack of victory in their expressions. We'd drawn first blood. Miriam patted my shoulder. "We did well today." The judge seized through his manipulations. A trembling relief coursed through me. While the final verdict was still a ways off, we'd secured a crucial win. I stifled the impulse to sob or laugh. This was merely the opening act of what could be a long legal battle, but for the first time, I glimpsed a future in which justice might prevail, and perhaps even a future in which I could heal. With the escrow and freeze orders in place, the financial noose around my husband tightened. He couldn't freely access the stolen funds. The new condo remained in limbo, tarnishing his fresh start. But while the legal front moved with measured precision, my emotional life whirled in turmoil. One early morning, a day after the hearing, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered cautiously, half expecting a telemarketer. Instead, a hesitant female voice spoke. "Hi, you don't know me, but my name is Danielle. I think we have someone in common." My heart dropped. Had my husband already moved on to a new woman, or had he been seeing her all along? My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" I'm seeing Alan," she admitted in a rush. I just found out he's married. Or was. Or something." She paused, as if trying to gauge my reaction. "He told me you two are separated, that the divorce was amicable. But I saw the news about your lawsuit against him, the forgery and all that. I Googled him because certain things weren't adding up, and I found court records. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I needed to know the truth." I was momentarily speechless. How many layers of desert had Alan built around himself? My throat went dry. We're not separated by choice. He defrauded me, forging my signature to sell our house. Now he's living it up in that condo, I guess. Danielle made a small choking sound. He used me, she whispered. He said he was single, that he'd just moved to start fresh in a new career. I had no clue about any of this. I pitied her, though a small ember of bitterness smouldered. She was, after all, the woman he was sleeping with, but hearing the tremor in her voice, I knew she was another victim of his manipulations. It's okay, I managed. I'm not mad at you. He's good at lying. He fooled me for years. A pause, then a soft sigh. Look, I'm done with him, but I want to help you. I have some text messages, emails, even pictures that might support your case. If you need them, they're yours. I hate him for lying to both of us, and if I can do anything to expose him, I will. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in my chest, relief, anger, gratitude, heartbreak. That would be, yes, please, anything helps. By the time the call ended, I felt oddly calmer. My husband's web of deceit was unraveling. He'd built a second life under false pretenses, not just legally but emotionally. Now the people he'd manipulated me, Danielle, even Tia to some extent, were uniting against him. Over the next few days, Danielle forwarded a trove of evidence, screenshots of him confessing he had liquidated some assets to secure his move, vague references to a soon-to-be ex-wife, and even a scan of a suspicious legal document. She'd photographed it while he slept, noticing it bore my forged signature. My pulse raced as I realized it exactly matched the scrawl on the house deeds. This was the smoking gun. I shared everything with Miriam, who was ecstatic. This is gold, she said. He practically admits to wrongdoing in these messages. If Danielle is willing to testify, it solidifies our case. But beyond the legal advantage, I found an unexpected sense of camaraderie with Danielle. We were both reeling from his betrayal. Late one night, we spoke again, sharing stories, her brief yet intense romance with him, my long, crumbling marriage. Instead of the rivalry society might expect between a wife and a mistress, we formed a fragile bond over the trauma inflicted by the same man. I felt so stupid, she whispered at one point. But hearing you, I realize it's not us, it's him. He's the liar. I swallowed a lump in my throat, marveling at the twisted solace we found in each other's experiences. The more I learned, the clearer it became. Alan thrived on manipulation and control. He wanted a picture-perfect marriage or a new fling, whichever served his purposes at the time. When obligations grew inconvenient, he simply cut ties, forging signatures, rewriting narratives. But now, for the first time, he faced an army of the betrayed. And for me, that was the spark of empowerment I desperately needed. Bolstered by Danielle's evidence, Miriam pressed forward with renewed vigor. The second hearing approached a critical juncture where we'd argue the sale's invalidity and push for a final ruling on the divorce's financial terms. Tension coiled in my gut, but a strange sense of confidence underpinned it. We had the upper hand. When the day arrived, the courthouse felt less intimidating. Tia accompanied me again, while Danielle volunteered to appear as a witness. I had no illusions that Alan would be gracious or cooperative, but after our last confrontation, I sensed his swagger might be subdued. Sure enough, as soon as I entered the courtroom, I saw Alan conferring with his lawyer, frowning at a stack of papers. He cast me a venomous glare, then turned his head away. Danielle sat near the back, trying to blend in, though nerves flickered across her face. The proceedings began, and it was a whirlwind of arguments. Miriam presented the new material, text exchanges, the incriminating legal document scan, financial records. Danielle had gleaned. It showed how Alan manipulated the house sale, proceeds to purchase his condo and pay off personal debts. My husband's attorney tried to object, questioning the validity of Danielle's claims. But then Danielle took the stand. She spoke tremblingly at first, but gained composure. "He told me he was single, that his marriage was over a long time ago," she recounted. "He said his wife," she shot me an apologetic glance, "didn't want anything to do with their house. That he had full permission to sell, but once I found out he was lying, I confronted him. And he admitted forging her signature, saying no one would ever know." A hush fell in the courtroom. Alan's lawyer fidgeted. Judge Reynolds looked at Alan with obvious disapproval. "Did you indeed admit this?" she asked him directly. His attorney quickly intervened, blabbering about hearsay and lack of context, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "I want Mr. Robertson to answer." Alan stood, clearing his throat. His expression was a mix of fury and fear. "Your Honor, she's lying. She's just someone I dated briefly. She's angry I ended things, so she wants revenge. This is all fabricated." He shot Danielle a chilling glare. Danielle's face paled, but she stood firm. "I have the texts," she said quietly, handing them to the bailiff. The bailiff passed them to the judge, who scanned them for a tense minute. I watched every flicker of the judge's eyes as she read, lines of disapproval deepening in her brow. Finally, she set them down, exhaling. "Mr. Robertson, these are extremely damning if authentic," Judge Reynolds said, her tone chilly. "We will conduct a verification, but I see no immediate reason to doubt their legitimacy, given the forensic evidence from your wife's counsel. If you have any contradictory evidence, now would be the time." Alan's mouth opened and closed. His attorney flipped frantically through papers. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Miriam seized the moment. "Your Honor, we request summary judgment on the voiding of the house sale, restitution of funds, and immediate dissolution of the marriage with appropriate compensation to my client for the fraud, emotional distress, and forgery." The judge leaned back, considering. "Given the seriousness of these allegations, I will rule on them in a timely manner. We will not finalize today, but I will expedite this matter. Mr. Robertson, I strongly advise you to produce any exculpatory evidence you claim to possess, or we may proceed with punitive measures." With that, the session ended, leaving Alan and his lawyer retreating in a flurry. I stood there, adrenaline coursing through me. Tia grabbed my hand, eyes shining. "This is huge," she whispered. "He's cornered." Outside, Danielle caught my eye. We shared a weary smile. No matter how the final ruling went, we'd forced Alan's truth into the open. He could no longer slip away unscathed. In the corridor, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I wasn't the same woman who had received that devastating phone call just weeks ago. The heartbreak lingered, my marriage was in tatters, the man I loved unrecognizable. But from these ruins, I was forging a new version of myself, someone who refused to be a victim, someone who fought back. As the legal machinery continued its slow grind, Alan turned desperate. The day after our hearing, I received a series of harassing text messages from an unknown number, but it didn't take a genius to guess their origin. They contained thinly veiled threats, claiming if I kept pushing, I'd regret it, that he had connections who could make my life miserable. I saved every text, sending them straight to Miriam. She promptly filed for a protective order, citing harassment. The next day, I found a suspicious scratch running along the side of my car. No direct proof it was Alan, but it was enough to rattle me further. Tia insisted I stay at her place for a while, fearing for my safety. I reluctantly agreed. Each day, I woke up in her guest room, disoriented, remembering that I no longer had a stable home or a reliable partner. Yet I reminded myself, he is the one in trouble, not me. That thought became a mantra, staving off my panic. Meanwhile, Alan's attempts to salvage his situation grew more brazen. One morning, Tia and I were out grabbing groceries when my phone buzzed. It was Alan, unbelievably, from a blocked number. I answered, dreading his sneering voice. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You don't know half of what I can do. That condo, my job, it's all replaceable. I have enough money to drag this out in court for years, bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left." My hand trembled, but I forced steel into my voice. "You already left me with nothing, remember? Sold my house, took the proceeds. I have nothing more to lose." He fell silent for a beat. Then his tone dipped into a bitter rasp. "I can ruin your credibility, your reputation. People will see you as a vindictive, desperate ex-wife. Is that what you want?" Rage flared in my chest. "Try it," I hissed. "I have proof of everything." "And you'd be walking right into criminal charges. Keep pushing and see how far you fall." I ended the call, my pulse pounding. Tia stared at me. I exhaled, fighting the swirl of fear and fury. "He's cornered," I repeated. "Threats are all he has left." But a nagging worry plagued me. He'd proven willing to commit forgery, theft. Who was to say he wouldn't escalate to violence? I told Miriam about the incident. She reassured me that once we got a final court order, plus the protective injunction, we could reduce his ability to harass me. But the process took time, and in the interim, I felt like I was living in a minefield. Despite it all, each new threat only solidified my determination. If he thought fear would make me back down, he miscalculated. I wasn't that timid wife who brushed off red flags. I was a woman scorned, a woman armed with legal representation, truth, and a circle of allies. He'd awakened a side of me that refused to be cowed. On a particularly restless night, I found myself recalling a line from a book I'd once edited at the publishing firm. "Resilience is not built in comfort, but forged in the fires of adversity." The embers of my adversity glowed fiercely now, and though it hurt like hell, I felt myself transforming, forging steel from sorrow. Weeks crawled by as we awaited the judge's final verdict. Alan's intimidation tactics continued sporadically, but we documented each instance. My lawyer pressed for additional criminal charges while also coordinating with prosecutors. The forging of my signature was not just a civil matter, but a felony one that threatened prison time if convicted. Amid the turmoil, an unexpected phone call brightened my day. Miriam rung with tentative good news. The judge's clerk called. "We're getting an expedited hearing date for final judgment on the property sale and the divorce. It's sooner than expected, next Thursday." Relief warred with apprehension. This was it, the moment I'd either see justice or face some new curveball. I prayed for the former. I'd poured my heart, time, and dwindling finances into this legal fight, refusing to settle or be coerced. The idea that it might soon be over was both exhilarating and terrifying. Thursday arrived cold and drizzly. Tia and I, along with Miriam, walked into the courthouse. Danielle was there, offering moral support and standing by in case the judge needed additional testimony. My chest felt tight, but I tried to focus on each breath. If everything went as we hoped, the house sale would be declared void, the new owners reimbursed from Alan's ill-gotten funds, and I'd regain rights to the property, or at least secure my half of its value. Most importantly, I'd be free from him. When the bailiff ushered us into the courtroom, I saw Alan seated beside his lawyer. He looked haggard, the shadows under his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights. Gone was the smug grin. He barely glanced at me, though I felt the tension radiating from him. Judge Reynolds entered, her gaze steady as she surveyed the room. Then, in measured tones, she reviewed the case details, the disputed house sale, the forgery, the subsequent condo purchase, the evidence from Danielle. My heart pounded with every word. Finally, she shifted her focus to Alan's lawyer. "Does your client have any additional testimony or evidence to refute the claims that he forged Miss Robertson's signature on the sale documents?" His attorney fumbled with some papers before stammering, "No, Your Honor, we would prefer to settle these matters amicably with Miss Robertson." The shift in strategy, opting for settlement rather than continued denial, confirmed they knew the game was up. Judge Reynolds nodded sharply. "Very well. I have reviewed the evidence extensively. I find that Mr. Robertson did commit forgery, invalidating the property sale. The funds obtained from said sale must be returned in full to Miss Robertson's estate. Should Miss Robertson wish to maintain ownership of the property, she may choose to do so once the buyers have been compensated. I also grant a divorce decree in her favor, awarding her compensatory damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Additionally, I am referring the forgery matter for criminal investigation by the District Attorney's Office." I heard a collective intake of breath, and my ears rang as her words sank in. A swirl of emotions, triumph, relief, sorrow collided within me. She said my favor, we'd won. The divorce was final, the property sale invalidated, the money forcibly returned, and Alan was facing a criminal investigation to boot. A strangled sound escaped Alan's throat. I risked a glance at him. He looked pale, shell-shocked, while his lawyer rested a hand on his shoulder, presumably urging composure. The bailiff rapped his gavel lightly to maintain order. In that moment, I let out a breath I felt I'd been holding for months. The judge turned her gaze upon me. "Miss Robertson, I hope this ruling helps you move on. I suggest you consult with counsel on how you wish to handle the property and the funds. We're adjourned." With that, it was over. The sense of closure flooded me in waves, though the aftermath would require sorting out finances and dealing with criminal proceedings. But the weight I carried, fear of losing everything, fear of not being believed, lifted from my shoulders. Miriam squeezed my hand. Tia pulled me into a fierce hug. Danielle beamed from the back row, tears shining in her eyes. The battered fragments of my life were slowly coming back together, and for the first time since that phone call, I truly believed I could piece them into something stronger. In the days that followed, the new owners of the house reluctantly agreed to walk away from their purchase in exchange for a settlement funded by Alan's forcibly returned money. It felt surreal stepping back into the house I once called home. The furniture was still in place technically. It was half mine, even if Alan had deserted it. I walked through each room, memories swirling, the spot in the hallway where we'd hung pictures of our honeymoon, the kitchen where we'd prepared dinners side by side in happier days. A pang of grief welled up. No matter how righteously angry I was, it hurt to let go of the life I'd envisioned. But I reminded myself that the place alone wasn't my anchor. I was my own anchor. I could keep the property, or I could sell it for real this time on my terms and use the money to start fresh elsewhere. After much consideration, I decided to sell. The house held too many ghosts. I wasn't the same woman who had decorated these walls with wedding photos. I wanted to close that chapter properly, free from lingering shadows of what might have been. Mark, our realtor friend, offered to handle the sale ethically this time, ensuring I got fair market value. I trusted him completely. Meanwhile, Alan's legal battles continued. The district attorney's office pressed charges for forgery. He attempted a plea deal, but that entailed him acknowledging guilt. The last I heard, his finances were in disarray, his fancy job uncertain once word got out about the criminal case. We never spoke again directly. The protective order I held against him barred further contact. Sometimes the finality of that severed connection stung like ripping off a bandage. But I knew it was necessary. As for Danielle, she found new work and moved to a different city, determined to distance herself from the fiasco. We stayed in touch, an unlikely friendship, forged from the wreckage of one man's deceit. She told me once, if nothing else, Alan inadvertently gave me a lifelong friend in you. I agreed. Finding solidarity in betrayal was an odd blessing. but one that made the scars more bearable. The day the new sale on the house closed, I sat in Mark's office, signing my name legitimately this time on the papers. When I finished, he handed me a check representing my portion of the proceeds. It was a substantial sum, enough to start anew, unburdened by debt or heartbreak. I felt tears prick my eyes. "This is it," I whispered, "the final tether to my old life severed." Mark nodded, sympathy in his gaze. "You deserve peace. I hope this helps you find it." I left the office, the check tucked safely in my purse, stepping into bright sunshine. My phone vibrated with a text from Tia. "Drinks tonight to celebrate your freedom?" I smiled, typing back a quick absolutely. Then I let out a deep breath, as if exhaling the last of my regrets. There was a sense of liberation in that moment, standing under the vast sky with the future wide open. The heartbreak hadn't vanished, but it no longer dictated my life. I owned my resilience now, a treasure more valuable than any house. In the months that followed, I channeled my settlement into forging a new path. I rented a sunny loft in a vibrant part of town, painting the walls in bright colors that made me feel alive again. I took up pottery classes, discovering a quiet joy in shaping clay into something meaningful. Occasionally, the first traveled, even if just for weekend getaways, reminding myself that the world extended beyond the confines of that old marriage. Tia remained a constant presence, my fiercest supporter, partner in laughter, and occasional tough love drill sergeant when I lapsed into self-pity. Danielle kept me updated on her own journey, focusing on therapy and self-care. We joked about writing a book together, detailing the cautionary tale of the man who scammed us both. Perhaps we would one day. Legally, Alan's criminal case lurched on. Miriam informed me that he eventually struck a plea deal, avoiding a lengthy trial, but shouldering fines and probation. Word reached me that his new job let him go once his conviction was made public. My feelings were conflicted. While part of me felt justice was served, another part mourned the man I once loved, now fallen so far. But I reminded myself, he chose this path, not me. As for my new life, it blossomed in unexpected ways. Freed from constant anxiety, I rediscovered passions I'd neglected, reading for pleasure, jogging by the river at sunrise, reconnecting with old friends. In time, I found myself smiling more, the heaviness in my chest lifting, the bitterness receded, replaced by a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, love wasn't entirely lost on me. One crisp autumn evening, as I strolled through a farmer's market, I caught sight of a local artist displaying luminous watercolors. I paused, admiring a painting of a phoenix rising from ashes, its colors vibrant and defiant. The symbolism struck me. The notion of rebirth from destruction felt intimately familiar. I purchased that painting and hung it in my loft's living room. Every morning, I saw it, a reminder of how I, too, had emerged from devastation, forging a stronger sense of self. My husband's betrayal was no longer the defining story of my life. It was a catalyst for growth, a dark chapter that made way for my own renaissance. Sometimes people ask if I'm still angry. The truth is, the anger now feels distant, replaced by an enduring sense of gratitude that I escaped a toxic web before it smothered me completely. I survived, fought back, and reclaimed my life. And if that isn't triumph enough, I don't know what is. Thank you for journeying with me through this harrowing but ultimately empowering tale. What began as a devastating betrayal evolved into a story of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. Despite losing what I thought was everything, my home, my marriage, my sense of safety, I gained a new understanding of my own strength. I discovered unexpected allies, uncovered hidden truths, and rose from the ashes of deceit, more determined and self-assured than ever before. If my story resonated with you, I'd be grateful if you like, share, and subscribe to my channel. By doing so, we can spread the message that no matter how dark a situation may seem, there is always a path to hope and renewal. Together, let's build a community that supports one another through life's toughest trials and celebrates every victory, no matter how hard won. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves and each other.